Hello, Michael here with another Redshift tutorial. Today we're going to be having a look at how to create a procedural shader for a gemstone using Redshift, and we're going to do this without using any material layering, and we're just going to try and keep it all on the one shader to keep it real straightforward and easy to follow. If you haven't already watched the last tutorial and you want to make the gemstone in Houdini, you can do so. And I'll show you where I'm up to here. I did a couple of alterations between the videos. The only major one that you need to do, or that you may want to do, is I changed my noise type to a turbulent noise. So if you're using this project file as a patron, you can, obviously you'll already have this, but if you want to make this yourself from scratch, you may want to use a turbulent noise. And those are the settings that I used there. I've also already set up the scene with a dome light, and I'll just quickly pop in a key light. Also worth mentioning, make sure that you have global illumination on, just so you get the same results in your render as I do. So we're going to start by creating a material network. Dive in there and we'll create an RS material builder. Drag that onto our gemstone. Dive in there, actually we'll just rename that to gem. Now if we have a look at the render, this is what we're getting, which looks fine. So we've got some nice little edge wear there, and the dents and scratches. So to begin with, we're going to create our bump map, because it's a lot easier to see when you're using just a diffuse shader. And I'll turn off the specularity, so we just get a nice diffuse surface to work with. There is quite a bit to the bump map, because I wanted to be able to make it quite procedural and very adjustable. We're going to reference a couple of different things on our surface. So what we'll do first is we'll create an RS curvature node, and I'm going to plug that into the diffuse just so we can see what's happening. I'm going to use this as a mask to mask out the edges of our gem. So I need it to have a radius of quite low. Okay, something like that. I know the edges look quite hard at the moment, but because of the way we're going to adjust the mix of this, it won't matter too much. So we're going to add a noise in on top of that. So we'll need a layer, color layer, and we're going to start by giving the base color a 50% grey, or 50% white or black if you want to look at it that way. So you can see it's just the same. And then we're going to use the curvature to adjust our layer 1 input, which is going to be a RS max and noise. So we'll plug that into layer 1, change it to color, and the curvature will go into layer 1, change that to mask. Then if we enable layer 1, you can start to see it's having an effect there, and it's only affecting the edges, and obviously where there's dents and stuff as well, because it's picking those up with the curvature node. Now for our noise, you can use anything you like. I tested this a little bit and I found that I liked the Voronoi 1 with a lot of octaves, 14.5. I reduced the global scale quite a bit, so it's just got these little pocky sort of dots. And then you can adjust the brightness, which will give you more, in this case, indentation. So the dark areas will be how much it's being indented. So I'm going to make that -0.4. And actually, one thing I haven't done is I need to make sure that there is a UV map on this. So we're going to create a UV project node back in our geo, just plug that in there. This is just going to help us with masking as well. It won't have any impact here so much, but we're going to need the axes to be correct for when we apply some more noise later on. So we're going to set this layer 1 blend mode to multiply. Okay, so this is the beginnings of our bump map. So what we can do now is create a Redshift bump map, run the color layer into the input of the bump map texture node, and then the output into the overall bump input. So then you get this. We're going to change the height scale to be very, very small, 0.005. We'll adjust this when we can see the specularity a bit more. It's probably going to be a lot less than that, but this will sort of depend on how much you want that to be visible. Yeah, I'm going to keep it at 0.1 for now, and then I'm going to adjust that once I can see the specularity map. Will be easiest to determine how bumpy I want that once we can see the glass shader. The bumpiness will affect the refraction quite a bit, so you'll want to adjust it. And now you can see that if we turn off the diffuse layer, that's the effect we get. So yeah, you can see that you'll probably want it to be a lot less, but we'll just leave it over the top for the moment. And also you can see how the curvature node is allowing it to blend out. And if you want, you can increase or decrease the radius now to see how much fall. It will sort of affect your fall off as well. So if you want it really tight, you do something like that. So I might leave it at 0.01 for the moment. Now we can actually add some overall bumpiness to it. So I'm going to create another max noise. Just in case you didn't know, I really like the max on noise node. And we're going to create a displaced turbulence on this. And this is just going to give us some overall bump across the surface. We'll change the octaves to 9. And the scale to half, so it repeats quite a lot. Then we can use the contrast to increase or decrease the amount of bump we get there. So you can see that's how it's going to affect the surface. And now we're going to use a bump blender and another bump map. So we'll plug this into the texture of the bump map and into the overall bump input. So you can see that's the sort of effect it's going to give you. We'll limit the amount of bump. I'm going to make it very subtle because this is overall over the entire surface, so you don't want it to be too apparent, but you just want to displace the surface a little bit. I'm going to plug this into layer 0 of the bump blender, and then the other bump map into the base input. And then the bump blender will go into the bump input. And now we can blend in the second bump input, probably something about 0.5, I think. Now this may be a little bit hard to see on YouTube, depending on what the compression's doing for me today, but it's pretty subtle, but you'll see it a little bit easier once you put in your refraction layer. Okay, so that is our bump completed for the moment. So I'm just going to group those into a nice little organized square and call this bump map. And I'll just change it to be blue, C to bring up your color, just in case you didn't know. Now we're going to be using a gradient to create a mask a couple of times here, so we can have a sort of dense and rough sort of surface at the bottom and gradient it out towards the top where it's refracting more light and is more translucent. So we're going to create a ramp, and just to give you an indication of how it's working, using the diffuse color, and just make sure you're actually viewing the chain from your UV project, like I wasn't. And then we'll change our ramp to be vertical, so we get this. And so the dark area in this case, we can actually invert this if we wish, but what I'm going to do is make that a monotone Q rather on both. It just gives you a nicer fall off, I find. If you use linear, it's a bit too harsh. Camel ROM's okay, but I just kind of prefer that fall off. And we're going to blend that, so we'll create an RS color layer, and this is going to go into the layer 1 mask, and the base layer we're going to make white, and then we're going to create a max on noise again and run that into the layer 1 color. So we're going to create some sort of interesting swirly smoke. This is kind of based on what, like an amethyst. There's a couple of different amethysts that you could look at. There's like a dark amethyst, which looks really cool, which we can sort of quickly do here, but we're going to sort of go for the more purpley one. So we'll just run that into the diffuse color. Actually, we're going to need to invert that and set that to multiply. So you can already sort of see what I'm going for here. And the noise, you can use anything. You can use the Luca, which looks pretty sweet actually. I think I used Naki on the test one, and then you could adjust its complexity with the octaves, and then obviously its scale if you want sort of larger smoky swirly smokes. Something like that's pretty cool. So we're actually not really going to be using a diffuse layer in this particular one. We're going to turn up the refraction transmission to start with. So now you can see the way the bump map is working, and it's obviously much too intense. So why don't we turn that down? Something like that. So you're getting a little bit of swirly surface, and then we're also getting that damage sort of happening on the edges, as well as the damage that we created with the VDB that you can see there. So when you're looking at it about its normal resolution, it looks quite interesting. Zooming in, obviously it doesn't look as nice, but this is okay for our working purposes. Now to make this swirly stuff visible, we're going to plug it into our subsurface, and it's going to be pretty intense when we plug it in. So we'll create a range node and plug that into the input, and then the output into the scatter coefficient. We're going to change the subsurface type to be extinction, and now the scatter scale is what is going to really determine how much of this subsurface you're just going to see. So because our subsurface color from here is quite intense, I'm going to change the max range to be very low. It's going to be 0.001, and then I can just use a scatter scale of 1 and to begin to work on it there. It just makes it a nicer number to work with, otherwise you're going to be, you know, dealing with super decimal places. So now it's a much easier thing to adjust. Now with the coefficient, we can actually blend a color into it. So we will use an RS color layer again, and we'll just make that minimize so we don't have to look at the big version. I'm going to plug that into the base layer color, and then on layer 1 we're going to multiply a color. So you can use any color you like. I'm going to use a purpley color, and then run the out into the coefficient, and then as you increase the saturation you'll see it come in. At the moment it's infecting if the coefficient color is being, rather the smoky color is transmitting light, where there's the other areas where there's no smokiness, it's not. So we could actually invert that if we wanted. So now the smoky color is purple, and the rest of it is transmitting light through it. We can make the smokiness more apparent by increasing the scatter scale as you like. Just be aware with subsurface scattering with this shader, it becomes quite intense and starts to pick up a lot of light, particularly when you've got a refracting surface. So lower numbers are usually better to begin with, otherwise you get these really hot areas. So I'm just going to use 2 for the moment, and we'll maybe fix that in a bit. Now our reflection layer is currently off. If you turn it on, you can start to see a bit more reflection across the surface, which can help you a bit. I'm actually going to use this to create a bit of roughness over the top, which will help the sort of cloudiness at the bottom a little bit. So You can use a ramp to do this very easily. Plug it into the reflection roughness. So, and we'll invert it. So now the bottom part is rough, and we'll just change that to be a monotone cubic. And you could apply noise to this as well if you want to offset the roughness, just in the same way that we did the multiply here. You could also use an ambient occlusion, which is RSAO, and run that into the reflection roughness. And what that's going to do is I'll plug it into the diffuse color so we can see it. Turn off our refraction and our subsurface scattering. So I'll make the dark areas red so you can see them. So what it's doing is the ambient occlusion is detecting areas where there's close edges, sort of like pockets, and it's adding a dark color to them, which in this case, if we plug it into our reflection roughness, we'll need to invert it, because what it's reading is anywhere there is a value of 1 or white, it will be rough. So we'll run that into reflection roughness, and then we'll turn off our diffuse and we'll turn our other layers back on, so you can see it's still specular in the regular areas, but in there it should be quite rough. Refraction transmission back up, and our scatter back to 2. So you can see there in those scratched areas we're getting some roughness, which you'd expect from areas that have gotten damaged. They won't be as specular and polished. The last thing that you could do is add some refraction roughness in. So we'll use a ramp for that again. You could use a previous ramp from, say, what we were using for the subsurface scattering, which I actually might do here. So I'll just run that into the refraction roughness. So now the areas where the smokiness is, you will see roughness. You could also run it from the blend, and we'll need to invert that. So now it's only rough where the cloudiness is, which can be quite a cool effect, though you may want to use a range there, and then we can just reduce that intensity with the max output range. So you can see it's sort of cloudy down there now, and now this will be procedurally affected by your shader, which you can set to whichever you want. Finally, if you want to change the translucent color of your gem, you can change it to anything you want. I've gone with a purple, so you may want to use a purple color, or you could use a complementary color. So if you try a complementary color there, and then you can just reduce the saturation. And with the refracted color, you could still apply a noise to it if you want. I'm just going to keep it a little bit simple looking and just keep it as a solid color that's going to be multiplied throughout. You could also use the reflection color to do something similar and get some unusual reflections. It can become a bit too intense though, so in this case I would recommend using just a white. Finally, if you want to make it look a little bit more magical, what we can do is actually plug our smoky color into our glow to make the smoky areas of our shader glow, obviously. So we can just run our color from our smoke into our overall emission color, and then you can increase the emission weight, and I think we're going to need to invert that. Yeah, so now the smoky areas will emit a light, but obviously it's quite intense and it's going to affect your subsurface scattering, so you may want to choose to do this instead of subsurface scattering, or if you're using it in combination with, then you may need to just adjust how much emission there is overall, because as you can see, as it gets more intense, obviously it starts to burn out your subsurface scattering. But it can be quite a cool effect, especially if you're animating this noise, which you could do with your offset. So that's pretty much all there is to it. It's just a real simple overview of things that you can do with the shader. Gives you an idea of how you can build it up. You can go a lot further than this if you wish, obviously. But yeah, here's some examples that I cooked up earlier. And I'll try and include some of these in for the patrons this week. That's it for this tutorial. If you found it useful, make sure you leave a like so other people can find it. And if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe, as we're bringing out CG and illustration tutorials every week, just like this one. Become a patron and access tutorial assets, bonus content, a private Discord, and more by clicking the link below.